The ballroom had been lit like a Hollywood premiere, chandeliers catching on champagne glasses, photographers clustered along the back wall. It wasn't supposed to be a night of confrontation. It was a fundraiser, the kind of event where celebrities posed with oversized checks and veterans in decorated jackets received polite applause. But the air shifted when Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson took the stage, broad shoulders wrapped in a tailored suit, a grin cutting wide across his face. He held the microphone like it was a prop. "You know," he said, voice booming, "people keep telling me legends are in the room tonight. They say Chuck Norris is here. Chuck Norris, the karate cowboy. The man who fought armies on screen." He paused, leaned forward, and then dropped it. "But let's be real. Chuck's karate is for cameras. In a real fight, he wouldn't last a minute." The crowd broke into laughter, a roar that echoed off the high ceilings. Some clapped along, relieved to be given permission to mock an icon. Others glanced uncomfortably at the front row, where veterans in dark suits shifted in their chairs. A gray-haired man in uniform frowned, jaw tightening. The cameras panned across faces, half amused, half unsettled. The Rock's charisma filled the room, but so did the sting of his words. At a small table near the edge of the stage lights sat Chuck Norris. No spotlight, no introduction, just a simple dark blazer, his posture straight, hands folded loosely. He didn't flinch at the jab. He didn't even blink. He lifted his eyes, calm and clear, and the laughter wavered. One camera operator instinctively zoomed in. On screen, Chuck's gaze looked like still water, hiding a depth nobody wanted to test. The Rock smirked, sensing hesitation in the room, and spread his arms wide. "Come on, folks. You know I'm right. Hollywood fights are fake. Out here, strength wins, always." His voice hit like a drumbeat. But the veterans didn't laugh. Neither did the young cadets in the back rows who had grown up watching Chuck's films, who remembered the stories of him training with Bruce Lee, serving in the Air Force, teaching martial arts long before fame. For a moment, the room balanced on the edge of noise and silence. Then Chuck moved. Not much, just a slow lean forward, his elbows resting on the table. He spoke, not loud but steady, and the microphone nearest to him picked it up. "Strength without discipline," he said, "is just noise." The words cut sharper than any punch. The room fell into silence, as if someone had switched off the sound system. The Rock's grin faltered for the first time. He chuckled awkwardly, tried to wave it off with a shrug. "Come on, Chuck. Don't be so serious. We're just having fun here." But the fun had drained out of the air. People in the crowd looked between them, unsure whether to laugh again or stay quiet. A young veteran in the second row leaned forward, whispering to the man beside him, "That didn't sound like a joke." And it hadn't. Chuck's tone hadn't risen, his expression hadn't changed, but his words landed with the weight of someone who had lived them. The Rock shifted his stance, microphone hovering near his mouth, searching for the rhythm he always carried so easily. He looked out at the audience, but the room wasn't with him anymore. It was waiting for Chuck to speak again, waiting for something other than theatrics. Chuck didn't add more. He leaned back in his chair, folding his hands again, eyes steady. The restraint itself felt like a blow. The absence of movement was louder than the Rock's laughter had been. Even the house band, poised to play a jazzy interlude, hesitated. The silence stretched, taut and heavy. Then it cracked. A single clap from the back. Tentative, almost nervous. Another followed. Soon, a pocket of applause rippled through the veterans section, low and deliberate. The Rock tried to smile, raising a hand as though to recapture the moment, but it was clear he had misjudged the crowd. His jab had landed, but Chuck's quiet counter had shifted the entire tone. The host of the event, standing at the side of the stage, stepped forward quickly, sensing the need to steer things back to celebration. But the moment had already taken root. The headlines were writing themselves in the minds of the reporters scattered through the room. Rock challenges Norris. Discipline versus strength. Phones lit up with live streams and shaky recordings. Online, hashtags began forming before the night was even over. And in the middle of it all, Chuck sat unmoved, as though nothing extraordinary had happened. His presence was not loud, but it was undeniable. The laughter that had filled the hall minutes earlier now felt distant, embarrassed. Everyone knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. Just wondering, where are you watching from? Write it down. Bellow. The host tried to paste a smile back onto the room, but the Rock moved faster. He took 2 easy strides to the front edge of the stage, toes at the lip like a diver. "All right," he boomed, working the crowd the way a drummer works a kick. "If discipline beats strength, let's see it beat. Right here, 1 round, no stunt doubles, no edits." He pointed down into the house lights, not at Chuck in particular, but in the direction where gravity knew he was sitting. "Your karate." My power gasps and laughter collided. Phones sprang up like a field of fireflies. The veteran section went still, hands on knees, the posture of men who know how fast pride can turn into injury. A pocket of younger guests erupted. Whoops, whistles, a chant starting and stalling. "Rock, rock," like an engine trying to catch. At the perimeter, production assistants flitted frantically, headsets pressed to ears, searching for an adult in charge of a night that had stopped asking permission. Chuck didn't leap to his feet. He didn't pretend not to hear. He stood the way a man stands before crossing a street. Look left, look right. Step only when stepping makes sense. The room tracked him as he rose, quiet as if someone had just entered a hospital room. He adjusted the cuff of his blazer, then slipped it off and folded it once, twice, laying it over the back of his chair. A small gesture. Careful. Final. "Sir, we can't," the host started, but the Rock had already descended the stairs at the side of the stage, suit coat flaring, tie loosened with a tug that seemed calculated and somehow still honest. He reached the floor and clapped his massive hands together once. The sound ricocheted into the rafters. "Circle up," he commanded the crowd with a grin, and because he was who he was, they obeyed. Tables shifted, chairs scraped. A clearing opened in the center of the ballroom, rug patterned with geometric blues and golds, now an improvised ring. Security's instincts kicked. They moved in a line and then froze, assessing the optics of separating a beloved charity headliner from a legend without looking like villains. A woman with a clipboard mouthed insurance to a man who mouthed too late. The Rock rolled his shoulders, the fabric of his shirt tightening across his back. "No hard shots to the head," he offered, loud enough for cameras. "We keep it friendly." It was the line of a man confident that friendly still meant advantage. Chuck stepped into the margin of carpet, shoes quiet. No flourish. He loosened his collar with 2 fingers and slid his watch into the breast pocket of his blazer before leaving it on the chair. A volunteer held out a bottle of water. He shook his head, eyes never leaving the open space. The online world surged. Dozens of live streams bloomed. Captions popped like headlines running hot off a press that never cooled. Norris versus The Rock. Happening now. In a balcony, A local news cameraman shouldered his rig and muttered, "You've got to be kidding me," into a mic already hot. "Chuck," the Rock called, palms open, showman and competitor at once. "1 minute. Give them what they came for." Chuck's gaze lifted to meet him. "They came for veterans," he said, even, not scolding. The sentence didn't chastise. It reminded. And yet, he walked forward anyway, and the reminder turned into something like terms. The words traveled through the circle, cooling the fever by a degree. The Rock half smiled, nodding as if to say fair point, while letting the crowd's hunger settle where he needed it. He bounced lightly, testing the carpet's give. His shadow swung like a pendulum in the chandelier light. A man in a marine dress jacket rose from his chair and spoke into the hush. "Keep it clean, gentlemen." Not a joke, not a plea. An order dressed as a courtesy. It stabilized the edges of the circle. Even the Rock inclined his head at that voice. The host forced his way into the ring that wasn't a ring, mic in hand. "Okay, listen up," he said, breath short. "This is a demonstration. It stays controlled or it doesn't happen." He looked at Chuck first. Chuck gave a fractional nod. He looked at the Rock. The Rock spread his hands. "Who? Me?" And the crowd laughed, grateful to release a little steam. "Phones down," someone from security begged. Phones did not go down. Chuck set his feet. Not a cinematic stance. Not something stolen from a poster. Weight centered. Chin tucked. Hands relaxed. He looked smaller than the Rock, by a category, not just an inch. He looked older by decades, and that truth hovered above the carpet like heat. The Rock rotated through a little shoulder warm-up and grinned to the far corner, where a table of young athletes cheered like they'd been waiting their whole short lives to see this exact moment. "What are the rules?" he asked, as if the rules could be written in a sentence in a room without any. Chuck answered with absence, no quips, no list. He simply faced him. The message was clear. The rule is control. The energy in the ballroom wound tight enough to hum. The band, forgotten on stage, stood with instruments hanging like punctuation at the ends of unfinished sentences. The chandeliers seemed too bright, like a spotlight held too long. Even the ice in glasses stopped clinking. The Rock raised his hands, palms forward, then closed them into loose fists. "Ready?" he said, meaning, "Are you sure?" Chuck breathed once through his nose, the kind of breath you take before stepping into cold water you've chosen. He gave the smallest yes. The host lifted his mic and tried for neutral authority. "1 minute on my count," he said. "If either of you says stop, we stop. This is a charity event, not a pay-per-view." He looked to the veterans section. "You're our witnesses." A few nodded, the solemnity turning the room from circus to something like a ceremony. "3," the host said, voice vibrating against the mic grill. The circle drew in another inch. 2. The Rock tilted forward, a predator reading distance. 1. He didn't say go. He didn't need to. The space itself seemed to release. The Rock stepped first, quick, committed, the confident surge of a man who trusted his balance and his mass. The carpet dented under his lead foot. His right shoulder dipped the barest fraction, and 100 phones caught the tell. Muscles coiled. The crowd inhaled as one, breath held like a drawn bowstring. Halfway between awe and fear of what happens when legend and momentum collide. 20 seconds had not yet passed. The room felt older than chandeliers, older than cameras. A circle of people watching two men test an argument with their bodies. Somewhere, a veteran whispered, "Watch his hands." Somewhere else, a kid whispered back, "Whose?" The answer, unspoken, was both. The rock's weight shifted another hair. The show reached for the truth, and the ballroom hung on the smallest space between intention and contact. That thin wire where a night can break one way or the other. No bell rang, no referee raised a hand. The clash began the way storms do. Sudden, inevitable. The Rock moved first, carrying his size like a weapon. He snapped forward with a probing jab, heavy even in restraint, meant to test, to remind everyone whose body ruled the room. Carpet compressed under his step. His sleeve whispered against his ribs as the punch cut through air. The crowd leaned forward, 1,000 lungs holding back sound. Chuck shifted half a step. His torso rotated on a silent hinge, the fist sliding past him into nothing. Then came the counter. His right palm traced the smallest arc and landed heel first against the Rock's sternum. Not a blow, more like the pressure of a truth delivered directly to bone. The sound was barely audible, a muted thunk. The Rock's balance faltered, his chest jolted. His eyes widened, pure surprise, clean and unguarded. He didn't fall. Pride rescued him with a step back, a shallow inhale, a smile forced too late to convince. Phones shook in raised hands. In the veterans section, a single voice muttered, "Centerline." It wasn't advice. It was recognition. The Rock bounced lightly, rolling his shoulders as though to shake off the echo. He fired a sharper left. Chuck tilted his head, just enough. His left hand brushed the wrist, the angle bent, the punch deflated. A murmur rippled outward. The host gripped his mic and stayed silent. Even the chandeliers seemed to hum louder, as though the current in the air had thickened. The Rock tried again. Short right, compact, designed to herd Chuck. A figure 8 of steps erased its power. Chuck touched the elbow, guiding it off track, then ghosted inside and brushed a hand against his ribs. Not strikes, edits. Entire frames cut from the sequence before it could finish. The Rock froze, breath caught between pride and disbelief. His grin faltered. He circled once, twice. The crowd no longer looked like party guests. They looked like witnesses at something older. Then he committed. Left feint, tight right hook, the kind that had humiliated men on canvas. The crowd flinched. Chuck slid his foot a palm's width, head slipping under the arc. His counter wasn't a hit, but a presence. Fingers grazing the rib, a palm angled to the hip. Enough to interrupt, to dismantle. The Rock stopped, mid-motion, like a man whose options had vanished. For a heartbeat, they locked eyes. To the crowd, it looked like hesitation. To them, it was conversation. Chuck stepped back, lowering his hands slightly. Not mockery, invitation. Noise wanted to return, but found no door. Applause felt wrong. Laughter impossible. Silence pressed down, heavier than sound. The Rock's breathing deepened, not tired, but real. Curiosity crept into his pride. He nodded once. Chuck answered with the smallest tilt of his chin. Terms had shifted. From the back, a veteran's voice rose. "Hands up!" No one knew for whom. Both men complied. The host finally croaked, 30 seconds. The number sliced through the tension. Phones jittered higher, streams exploding with comments. The rock surged forward at last, compact and honest. No feint, no disguise. A single question. Can you stop this? Chuck sank lower, palms open, body angled like a compass ready to answer. The air collapsed between them, electric. Thousands of eyes fixed on the space where bodies were about to collide. Impact arrived, only to dissolve into something the crowd hadn't expected. A moment transformed in the blink between intent and contact. The silence after the first exchange cracked when the rock snarled, chest heaving, face taut. His voice thundered across the hall. "That was luck!" The words came out raw, a mixture of pride wounded and ego unwilling to bow. He lunged forward before anyone could blink, and the room roared in response. Phones shot higher into the air, lights blinking like fireflies. Someone yelled, "Come on, Dwayne!" The cry was swallowed by the collective hum of thousands holding their breath. The rock's body was all force and fire now. Every muscle coiled like rope about to snap. He swung wide, shoulders turning, the power undeniable, but reckless. The energy of a man fighting not an opponent, but the reflection of his own humiliation. His fists carved arcs in the air that seemed to shake the floor beneath the audience's feet. Chuck, in contrast, was stillness turned into motion. He didn't retreat or stiffen. He simply shifted, half a step, a tilt of the head, a breath in the right direction. The chaos of the rock's swings broke against him like waves on stone. Each dodge looked effortless, but behind it was precision sharpened by decades of discipline. His hands hardly moved, his stance unchanged. Yet somehow the storm never touched him. At first, the crowd screamed with every punch the rock threw, urging him on. But as his strikes cut only air, voices faltered. Applause dimmed. The energy drained into silence. The realization spread. This wasn't spectacle. This was exposure. They were watching a man exhaust himself against someone who didn't even need to hit back. The rock bellowed and drove forward with a flurry. Left hook, right cross, knee snapping upward in desperation. His breath tore out of him, loud, ragged. Chuck sidestepped, spine straight, never flinching, eyes locked calmly on the man unraveling before him. The strikes came faster, but the faster they came, the easier they were to see. Chuck's shoulders rolled just enough. His palm brushed an arm aside, his torso leaned a fraction, never more. Every movement whispered control, like he wasn't dodging punches, but bending time itself. The room's energy shifted again. People lowered their phones without realizing, drawn into the strange quiet, swallowing the space. The band in the corner no longer touched their instruments. Journalists leaned forward but forgot to take notes. It felt less like a fight, and more like a lesson no one had signed up to learn but couldn't turn away from. Then, in the eye of the storm, Chuck spoke. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. As the rock barreled close, Chuck's hand brushed his shoulder, and his words cut through the silence. Real strength is control. The rock froze for a fraction, as if the phrase had more weight than the contact. His next punch slowed before it even left his side. He blinked hard, chest rising and falling too fast. Sweat beaded across his forehead, trickled down his jaw. His grin had long vanished, replaced with something close to confusion. The crowd murmured now, hushed but constant, as though afraid to break the fragile edge of revelation forming in front of them. A child in the front row whispered to his father, "Why isn't he hitting back?" The father, a veteran by the looks of his jacket, answered quietly, "Because he doesn't need to." The rock's breathing grew heavier, each inhale sharp, each exhale ragged. His feet lost their spring, steps dragging where they had bounced before. Rage was still there, but fatigue was catching it by the throat. His swings grew wider, slower. Chuck, untouched, waited in silence. He never struck, only allowed the momentum to collapse on itself. A final desperate haymaker ripped through the air, sweat spraying as the rock's fist sliced past Chuck's shoulder. But even before the punch missed, everyone knew it would. Chuck didn't counter with violence. He simply tapped the rock's arm away, guiding him past. The larger man staggered, catching himself on shaky knees. His roar had vanished into labored breath. His body wasn't failing from a blow, it was failing from itself. The silence in the hall deepened, more powerful than any cheer. This wasn't a contest anymore. It was exposure, raw and undeniable. The Rock, a man built on image and power, was unraveling in front of thousands. Chuck, with nothing but stillness and a few precise motions, stood unmoved. And then came the pause, the eye of the storm where everything balanced on a breath. The Rock bent slightly forward, gasping. Chuck stood straight, his hands lowered. The audience held still, waiting, wondering if the storm had truly passed, or if the larger man had one more surge left inside. The question lingered heavy in the air. Would pride drive him further, or had the lesson already begun to carve its mark? The Rock tried to summon another wave, but his body betrayed him. His shoulders rolled forward, as if searching for energy that wasn't there. Breath rasping through his chest in uneven bursts. Sweat darkened the fabric along his spine, and the gleam that had once been confidence now looked more like desperation. Around them, the crowd leaned in, phones half raised, some still filming, others forgotten in trembling hands. The room had become an arena without ropes, and silence pressed harder than any cheer. His eyes gave away what his posture tried to hide. The grin was gone. In its place sat something raw, an admission that strength, at least the kind he always trusted, might not be enough. He threw a punch more out of pride than conviction. It dragged through the air slower than he intended, as if time itself had thickened. Chuck moved a single step, effortless, the kind of motion born from decades of discipline. The strike passed through emptiness. Chuck didn't even raise his hands fully. A slight pivot was enough. People in the front row exchanged glances. Veterans, used to reading weakness in a man before he admitted it himself, recognized the signs: shoulders dropping, guard loosening, breathing short. A journalist whispered to a colleague, "He's running out," and the words carried further than he expected in the quiet. The Rock pressed forward again, stubborn, but each advance felt slower, heavier. His frame was massive, but tonight, mass was his enemy. Chuck waited. He didn't mock, didn't gesture, didn't feed the crowd. His stillness was the sharpest contrast possible. While the Rock swung in widening arcs, Chuck seemed to shrink the space. Every step tighter, every shift calmer, until the difference between them was obvious to everyone watching. One man was fighting the other was simply present. A final combination came, wild, heavy, desperate. Chuck let it exhaust itself, then moved inside the storm. His hand brushed the Rock's shoulder, steady, almost gentle. At that distance he spoke, low enough for microphones to barely catch it. "Control is strength." The words landed harder than any strike. The Rock tried to answer with motion, but his body hesitated. He coiled for a hook, the same move that had ended matches before, but fatigue stole its speed. The punch floated out and missed badly. Chuck stepped clear, then, with no effort wasted, delivered a short kick into the body. It wasn't dramatic, but it was surgical. The Rock's face clenched, air burst from his lungs, his knees buckled, and one of them touched the floor. The room froze. Cameras zoomed tight on the moment, the giant kneeling, one hand braced against the carpet. No one shouted. The crowd had lost its appetite for spectacle. What filled the space was something heavier, the realization that they weren't witnessing entertainment anymore. They were watching a man stripped of all the armor fame had given him. The Rock stayed down longer than anyone expected. His breath came in sharp pulls, chest heaving like a furnace that couldn't keep pace. He looked at the floor, then at Chuck. What flickered in his eyes wasn't rage anymore. It was the first hint of humility. Reluctant, but undeniable. Pride tried to push him upright, but pride no longer had the strength to command his body. In the balcony, a cameraman whispered, "It hasn't even been a minute." And the words became part of the story, repeated in murmurs through the crowd. Down below, children were the first to clap, small hands striking together without cynicism. Their sound spread like a ripple. Soon, veterans joined, then ordinary guests, until applause filled the hall, not for domination, but for restraint, for the lesson unfolding. Chuck didn't advance to finish him. He remained where he was, breathing evenly, letting silence teach. The Rock finally raised his head. His jaw worked, trying to form defiance, but the effort drained away. He exhaled, shoulders sinking, and with that breath came a kind of surrender. Not defeat in the childish sense, but recognition that he had met a wall no power could smash through. For a heartbeat longer, everyone waited to see if he would try again. But his knee pressed into the floor with finality, and his hand hovered, uncertain, before settling flat against the ground. He muttered, almost too soft to hear, "Give me a second." It wasn't addressed to Chuck. It was to himself. Chuck inclined his head, allowing the pause. The applause swelled, gentle but insistent, until it wrapped around the circle like a tide. The Rock's breathing slowed, shoulders finding rhythm again. For the first time that night, he wasn't performing. He was just a man, learning something he hadn't expected to learn in front of thousands. The crowd sensed it too. This wasn't humiliation, it was revelation. And they leaned forward, hungry, waiting to see whether he would rise by pride or by humility. The air held still, charged, balanced on that choice. And the story didn't end yet. The Rock stayed down longer than anyone expected, one knee pressed into the floor, his shoulders rising and falling as if every breath weighed 100 pounds. Sweat ran down his temples, dripping onto the polished surface beneath him. Around him, the hall was alive with conflicting sounds, applause that started hesitant and grew steadier, gasps, nervous laughter quickly silenced. What had begun as a spectacle of bravado now felt like a reckoning, and the story didn't end yet. The Rock stayed down longer than anyone expected, one knee pressed into the floor, his shoulders rising and falling as if every breath weighed 100 pounds. Sweat ran down his temples, dripping onto the polished surface beneath him. Around him, the hall was alive with conflicting sounds, applause that started hesitant and grew steadier, gasps, nervous laughter quickly silenced. What had begun as a spectacle of bravado now felt like a reckoning. Chuck didn't move. He stood exactly where he had ended the exchange, feet planted, shoulders relaxed, chest rising with slow, measured breaths. He didn't raise his fists, didn't pace, didn't celebrate. That lack of movement made the contrast unbearable. One man bent beneath the weight of pride, the other anchored in calm, almost timeless. Cameras zoomed in, splitting screens between their faces. The Rock, flushed and straining. Chuck, composed and silent. Seconds dragged. The audience, thousands strong, leaned forward as if compelled. A woman covered her mouth with both hands. A veteran in the front row shook his head slowly. Children on their parents' shoulders craned to see. A boy raised a cardboard sign with the word "respect" scrawled in bold letters. That single word carried through the arena louder than the cheers. The Rock lifted his gaze. The defiance that had filled his eyes earlier was gone. What lingered was something rawer, shame, confusion, but also recognition. He wanted to stand, but his pride pressed harder than gravity. The silence waiting for him was merciless, broken only by the hum of cameras and the shuffle of restless feet. Chuck's voice cut through it, calm, direct, resonant. "Stand up, Dwayne. Not to fight. To listen." It wasn't loud, yet it carried across the entire space. The Rock swallowed hard. Slowly, painfully, he pushed himself upright. His frame still dwarfed Chuck's, but the balance of presence had shifted. For the first time, size meant nothing. The audience erupted, though not with the rowdy cheers that had greeted the start. This was applause weighted with release and respect. Reporters typed furiously, knowing the headlines were writing themselves. Yet the loudest thing in the room was the unspoken realization. They weren't watching a contest. They were watching a man stripped of performance. Chuck stepped forward, only once, and extended his hand. No theatrics, no hesitation. The Rock stared at it, pride raging in his chest, but the fatigue of body and spirit left him no refuge. After a moment that felt like an eternity, he grasped the hand. Their palms locked. Cameras caught it, flashes bursting like fireworks. Chuck leaned closer, enough for the microphones to pick up. "Victory isn't about who falls, it's about who learns." The words landed heavier than any strike. The Rock's jaw tightened, his eyes glistened, and after a long pause he nodded once. Acknowledgement, not defeat. Applause thundered again, waves rolling through the crowd. Children shouted Chuck's name, veterans clapped with quiet dignity, even skeptics stood to their feet. The MC, who had hyped the confrontation earlier, lowered his microphone, suddenly aware that his voice could only cheapen the moment. The Rock exhaled, muttered a phrase caught by the nearest camera. 1 minute. It wasn't protest. It was confession. The words rippled outward. People whispered them, repeated them, let them solidify into legend. 1 minute with Chuck Norris. That would be the story tomorrow. But those present knew the truth went deeper. Chuck turned from his opponent to the crowd. His voice stayed level, almost gentle. "Strength without discipline is noise. Discipline without respect is nothing." Every syllable rang with finality. The words settled into the silence like stones in still water, rippling out until no one dared speak. The Rock bowed his head, not crushed, but changed. He had entered chasing spectacle and left with humility, and that shift mattered more than any scoreboard. Chuck didn't wait for applause. He stepped quietly out of the circle, walking toward the edge of the hall as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. That absence of showmanship was the greatest statement of all. The audience buzzed, some clapping wildly, others too stunned to move. Children's voices rose above the noise, one especially piercing. "Teach him, Chuck!" The innocents cut through the tension, drawing soft laughter, nods, and renewed applause. The Rock glanced toward the boy, and for the first time that night, he smiled. Not for cameras, not for image, but for himself. Chuck disappeared into the dim light beyond the crowd. What remained was not triumph, not humiliation, but a shared truth hanging in the air. Even the strongest must bow to discipline, and even giants can still learn.